So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about the essentials of Onshape. So, this webinar is really intended for those that are just getting started with Onshape, maybe have a little bit of background in CAD, have used other CAD applications, but are trying to understand kind of the fundamentals of Onshape. And what we're going to do in this webinar is really walk you through, at a very high level, a day in the life of an Onshape engineer, right? Designing a part, creating an assembly, and of course, creating a drawing, and really just walk through kind of the basics of those three key pieces of getting your job done. Now, as I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address the questions as we go through today's webinar. But again, think of this as a crash course, so to speak, in Onshape. We're going to go through as much as we can in the hour that we have. All right, so let's get into it. Now, before I get into the topic of the day, there are always a few things about Onshape I like to mention in general. One of the first things I like to mention is our mission statement, our goal with Onshape, and that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And if you haven't downloaded the Onshape app for Android or iOS, it allows you to create sketches, parts, assemblies, all on a phone or on a tablet. But it's not just the mobile app. We also have the ability to access your Onshape data from any modern computer, Windows, Mac, Linux, even Chromebooks. So true accessibility from any device. And the other element of this is working together, working collaboratively. So again, our mission with Onshape, everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. Now, the other thing I always like to mention is, of course, we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, most people think of parts, assemblies, and drawings. But Onshape has a lot of additional things that you don't get in many other professional 3D CAD systems. One of the first things I always like to mention is just the frequent updates. So roughly every 3 weeks, you see new features being added to Onshape. This is much different than many other professional CAD systems that have one update a year. We have many. And the neat thing is you don't have to do anything. You log in and new features are there. So frequent updates, roughly every 3 weeks, we add new features to Onshape, and it means we're evolving very quickly. Now, the next thing I want to mention is built-in version control. With Onshape, this is something that's built into its core, and it's not something that has to be managed separately. So in many more traditional file-based systems, you have to have product data management or PDM systems to manage all your files and versions and so on. In Onshape, these capabilities are built in. So built-in version control allows you to capture those milestones in the design. The next thing I want to mention is read and write common CAD formats. We have the ability to import and export common CAD formats from many other CAD systems. So if you have a library of CAD data in another CAD system, if you've been using another CAD system for a long time and you've built up all this data over the years, or if you just have a library of CAD data that you work with, chances are we can import and work with that data. Now, we can also export to a number of different formats as well. So if you're using Onshape alongside another CAD application, or maybe you're working with a vendor, they'll be able to export in the format that they need. So we can read and write a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there. This includes STEP, IGES, Parasolid, DXF, the standards, but also native formats like SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA. So there's a long list of supported formats, and it means that Onshape works well alongside of the applications, and Onshape works well with that library of data you've built up. Now, the next thing I want to mention is entirely new methods of collaboration. With Onshape, we've introduced something that's never been done in professional 3D CAD, and that is the ability to collaborate in real time on the same model. So you can work on the same model if you're in the same room or across the world, and anyone in that document is going to see it update live. So real-time, simultaneous collaboration, if you're working with someone else, they see instant updates. If you haven't shared your document yet, definitely recommend it. There's a big share icon in the top right corner. All you have to do is enter their email address, define their permissions, and hit share. So definitely one of the big benefits. I'll show you an example of it in just a moment. The last thing I want to mention is custom features with FeatureScript. If you're at all interested in programming and at all interested in building your own CAD feature, FeatureScript is definitely something you should check out. It's a programming language that we developed that allows you to build your own CAD feature. Useful for automation, for saving time, for ensuring consistent design. There's all kinds of big benefits that come from building your own feature. And the neat thing about this is these features behave just like Onshape's native features. So we really are giving access to that underlying abilities that Onshape itself is built on. So custom features with FeatureScript. If you're at all interested in programming, definitely check that out. The next thing I want to mention is today's goals. Now, the goal today is pretty straightforward. You can think of this as, a crash course, so to speak, in Onshape. We're going to go over as much high-level things as we can, of course, in the hour that we have. So I'm going to walk through building a simple part. A big part of this webinar is going to focus on the interface. I think that's an important piece as you're getting started. Understand where all the various pieces, the important pieces of the interface are. So we're going to go through building a part, assembling a part, and creating a drawing of that part. And all the while going through all the various pieces of the interface necessary to do these things, right? So again, think of it as a high-level day in the life of an Onshape engineer. So build a part, assemble it, and then create a drawing. Of course, I'm going to walk you through import. Import's a very simple thing to do in Onshape, but I do want to walk through that. There's an icon in the interface that allows you to do it. And then as always, feel free to ask any questions. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address them. All right, so one final slide before we jump into Onshape. 5 things to remember. So if you had to take away 5 things from this webinar, just 5 key things to remember as you're getting started with Onshape. First, Onshape runs in a browser. One of the most common questions we get is, how do I download Onshape? You don't. You log in through a browser, cad.onshape.com, give us your username, account, password, and log in, and all your data is there. So there is no download and install with Onshape, right? You log in through any modern browser. This could be Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari. You want to avoid Internet Explorer or Edge. So any modern browser, on that list, Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari, should be just fine. The next thing to keep in mind as you're getting started is a document in Onshape is a project level container. The reason I bring this up is oftentimes new users consider a document a single CAD model, and that's not the case. You can have as many parts, as many sub-assemblies, as many assemblies, as many drawings as you want in a single document. So think of a document as a project, and within that document, you can have as many parts, assemblies, and drawings as you want. Now, the important piece to this is the tabs across the bottom of Onshape's interface. So as you open up a document, you're going to see all these tabs across the bottom. Those tabs are how we access the various pieces of the document. So again, think of that document as a project level container, and think of those tabs as ways of accessing the various pieces of that project. Now, the next 2 things I want to mention, sharing and collaboration, are built in, and data management is built in. So these are things that often you would have to install or manage separately in other CAD applications. These are things that are built-in functions in Onshape. So there's a share icon that allows you to share with others, view only, or edit, and you can collaborate with others as well. And data management capabilities are built in, and I'll show you an example of what I mean by that in just a second. All right, so these are just some things. If you had to take away 5 tips from this webinar, these would probably be the big highlights that I'd want to make sure everyone understands. All right, so now enough slides. Let's get into Onshape. Now, what I'd like to do is start simple and, of course, cover as much of the interface as I can before we get into actually building parts. Now, one of the first things I want to mention is, again, notice that Onshape runs in the browser. I'm using Chrome. You could be using Opera, Firefox, Safari, but you're logging in through the browser to your Onshape account. Once you log in, you'll see things like your documents list. Right? So the first thing you're greeted with is a list, or your documents page with a list of your documents. Right? So here's all the documents I've been working on recently. You'll see different filters on the left. So I have a recently opened filter, filters by recently opened docs, my documents, created by me, shared with me, owned by my company. So if you belong to a company, you'll have company-owned documents. And then you have different teams that you may belong to. Right? At Onshape, we have the concept of teams that allows you to easily share with a group. Then we have labels. The ability to tag a document with a label makes it easy to organize data. But I think for the new user getting started, the 2 filters that would be most useful are public and tutorials and samples. As the names imply, public is just a large library of public models. So if you're the type of user that likes to learn from others' examples, definitely check out the public models. Right? So the public models are a great resource for learning how others would accomplish things. You can open up the models. You can even take a copy of the model and build your own variation of it. These are designs that others have released publicly. So definitely check out the public models. If you're looking for a more instruction-based walkthrough of Onshape, I would recommend the tutorials and samples. There are sample models. There are videos that walk you through certain steps. So just keep in mind, tutorials and samples is a good resource if you're just getting started with Onshape. All right, so that's the filters on the left. The last one I want to mention is, of course, trash. And like the name implies, you'll want to make sure to, from time to time, empty out documents that are in your trash. Now, the next thing I want to mention is two very important icons in the document page. As you're first getting started, these are probably the first two things that you'll want to know, and that is create and import. So if you want to create a new blank document and get started with a new project, you would click create. If you want to import a file from some other CAD system, some file that you have that you want to work with, choose import. When you click import, it will ask you to browse to a file, and you'll browse and import that file into Onshape. Now, if you're just getting started and trying to build your first model, of course, you're going to click create. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is the search in the top. Of course, we have a simple search where you can do a search by bike, for instance, but we also have a drop down where you can choose more specific things. I can search by name, description, part number, very common one, state, maybe a revision number. So you can search by different criteria if you hit this drop down, but keep in mind it's just a simple search if that's all you're looking for. All right, now the other things that I want to mention are on the top right corner, and I wanted to bring up this in particular, the Onshape App Store. If you look in the top right corner of your documents page, you'll see a button that says App Store. If you're looking for CAM, rendering, finite element analysis, fluid dynamics, data management, content libraries, maybe a nuts and bolts library, for example, all of these things are available as apps in the Onshape App Store. I think there's over 47 or around 47 apps available in the Onshape App Store, and it's everything from rendering to CAM to finite element analysis to data management, all kinds of different apps that are worth checking out. So if you're looking to expand on your CAD data in any way, or if you're looking to manage your CAD data in a different way, all of these things are options in the Onshape App Store. So definitely check that out if you're interested in any of those types of operations that I mentioned. All right, so that is the Onshape App Store. Again, you'll find the icon in the top right corner of the Documents page. Now, there's an Invite Friends icon. Like the name implies, you enter their email address, and that will invite them to Onshape. And then we have Share, which I'll get into in just a bit. The last two things I want to mention about the Documents page, Help and your account settings. So in the very top right corner, we have Help, which is a very valuable resource. Our help is updated right alongside Onshape itself. It's always up to date, and it's a very detailed look at all the different commands in Onshape. So if you're looking for any specifics on any one command, definitely check help. Now there's other links here too. So we have videos, tutorials, feature script documentation if you're interested in writing feature script. I think the common one for most users is keyboard shortcuts. How do I find the keyboard shortcuts? And you'll find those again under help. Here's your keyboard shortcuts. You can expand this out or maybe print this if you want to print it, but this is the list of Onshape's keyboard shortcuts. Also under this are the forums. Definitely a valuable resource if you're looking for specific modeling help. Like how would I go about creating this type of shape, for example? Those are great questions that you can ask on the forums. There's a large community of Onshape users, even Onshape employees, that really pay close attention to those forums and help everyone out. So definitely check out the forums if you're looking for any kind of specific modeling advice. A lot of very talented people on the Onshape forums. Now, the next thing I want to mention again is account settings. This is another important one as you're getting started because you'll want to set things like your default units or how you rotate or pan the model, for instance. And these are all things that you can adjust under your account settings. So in the top right corner, you have your account name. If you click Manage Account, there's an option here for preferences. I'm going to focus primarily on preferences because I think that's the most common request, but keep in mind all of your account settings can be found here. So if you're looking for any general account setting, you can find it here. But under preferences, you have options to set the decimal length, set the default units for future documents. So a commonly asked question, how do we change to millimeters as our default? You can do that under your account settings. Set the decimal length, set the zoom, pan, and rotate. So if you don't care for zoom, pan, and rotate, or if you want to change it to match another CAD system that you use, you can do that under your account settings. So if SolidWorks, NX, Creo, and AutoCAD, and all this will do is allow you to map those, zoom, pan, rotate settings so that they're more familiar to you. But again, you'll find that under your account settings. We also have options to reverse the scroll wheel direction, customize your shortcut toolbars. Definitely worth checking out the preferences as you're getting started and set up kind of these settings that you prefer. All right, so enough on the documents page. Enough on the interface of the documents page. As I mentioned before, this is the first thing that you'll be greeted with when you log in, and it's really just a list of all your different documents. It isn't until you open one and really start to jump into things that you get to the meat of Onshape, right? So let's do that. I have a tab open already called Bike Frame. One of the first questions I want to answer is it possible to use Onshape in multi-monitors, or can I have as many tabs open as I want? And the answer is yes and yes. You can have as many Onshape tabs open as you'd like. You can move the tabs to as many different monitors as you'd like. So there's no real limitations there. You can move things around as much as you'd like. But keep in mind, you can have as many Onshape tabs open as you'd like, and you can even have a part on one screen and an assembly on one screen, or a drawing in a part, And again, you'll see that live updating. All right, so now that we have a document open, I want to focus on some key pieces of the Onshape interface, and this is really where you're going to spend your time in the document actually modeling. And I want to start on the top left and work my way to the bottom right. And we're going to start with the Onshape icon. If you click this, it takes you back to the documents page. So it's just a quick way to close the document. Now, to the right of that, you have the document menu. And here you have options like rename the document, change the units of this document, add properties to the document. We talked about part numbers and things like that earlier. Here's the properties for the document. So document menu, just a few common administrative tasks with the document. But then we get into versions and history. Now, what you won't find anywhere in Onshape's interface is a save icon. And there's no save in Onshape, and that's because everything that you do in Onshape is automatically saved. So you never have to worry about save, and you can see every step of the document's history in the actual versions and history dropdown. Right? So if I select this, I expand out my history, I can see every little step that's taken place in this document going all the way back to the moment it was created. You can think of this as like an infinite undo, but again, never have to worry about saving. You can go to any moment in your history and say, I want to restore to this point. So you never have to worry about breaking the design, so to speak, because you can always restore. And again, never have to worry about that data management aspect of managing your files. So that's versions and history. You'll find that in the top left corner here. Of course, we have our document name. Then moving to the right, we have some important functions, some of which I'm going to get to in a bit, like share. I'll show you share in a moment. But we also have things like integrated comments in Onshape. So I can tag people with comments. I can tag geometry with comments. It's a very effective way of communicating. But that's the document toolbar on the top right. As I mentioned, I'm going to go over a few of these in just a moment. But then we get into the real meat of the interface, in particular, the toolbar. Right? The toolbar, of course, is where you're going to find your tools. The key thing to keep in mind with the toolbar is it changes depending on what you're doing. So I'm in a part studio, so I see part modeling tools: extrude, revolve, sweep, loft, pattern, shell, draft, all those kind of part modeling tools I use to actually create parts. It isn't until we jump into a different tab that I see that toolbar change. So the toolbar is going to change if I go into an assembly, for instance. Right? So I've jumped into my bike frame assembly, and now you'll notice these icons have changed. Instead of seeing extrude, revolve, sweep, and loft, I'm seeing all the different mates that Onshape has. The insert to insert parts into my assembly. So again, just keep in mind this toolbar will change. As soon as you jump into a drawing, for example, you're going to see drawing tools, inserting views and adding sections and all those types of things. So the toolbar is always in the same place. It's just the icons will change depending on what you're doing. So that's the toolbar. You'll see it just below the document menu. Now I have the instance list or the feature list. And if you've come from any other professional 3D CAD system, this is a very familiar concept. It's essentially a list of all the parts and mates, in this case in the assembly. Or if we jump back to a part studio, all the sketches and features that make up that part. So the feature list, again, you can just think of it as a list of everything that it's taken to give you that model, right? So just keep in mind, this is where you'll find all your features. This is where you'll edit, rename, delete if you need to go back and change things. If you've come from any other professional 3D CAD system, chances are this is a familiar concept. All right, now, the last thing that I really wanted to focus on in the interface is the tabs across the bottom. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, but it's an important part of the interface. As I mentioned before, you can think of a document as that top-level container for your entire project. The tabs in the bottom are kind of how we access all those various pieces of the project. So you're going to have tabs for assemblies. You'll have a tab for your top-level assembly. You'll have tabs for the sub-assemblies. You'll have tabs for each of the various parts in your part studio, right? So again, just think of these tabs as just ways of organizing the bits of information that you need to create the overall project. Now you'll have tabs for assemblies, tabs for parts, tabs for drawings, but you can also import files if you want to store project-related files. For instance, this is a SolidWorks part that I've imported, an SLD PRT. You can see it's called Swing Arm, and if I left-click this tab, this is the actual SolidWorks model that I've imported into Onshape, and I'm using this in my assembly and the bike frame that you saw earlier. My point in this is I've imported this from SolidWorks, I'm using it in my Onshape assembly, and you can see it's just another tab in my document. Now, this also extends to other types of files. So for instance, PDFs. Another example where, it's a file that I can store inside of a document. And it's just a neat way for me to organize project-related data. So if you have any, spreadsheets, text files, G-code, there's all kinds of examples of project-related files that you may want to store within the document. You can think of Onshape as not just a CAD tool, but a tool for all that data management as well. All right, so that's enough on the interface. As I mentioned before, the key things I would say are the toolbar, the feature list, and of course the tabs across the bottom. Knowing those three pieces is a very good first start. Now let's get started actually building our model. And what I'd like to do is walk you through building something similar to this dog bone link. In this dog bone link, we're going to build the part, and then we're going to jump into the bike frame and assemble the link arm to the bike frame, and then we'll create a simple drawing of it. So let's get started. Now, as I mentioned before, you can have as many tabs in a document as you'd like. You can have as many parts, sub-assemblies, drawings in a document as you'd like. I want to create a new part, so I'm going to go to the bottom left corner, and you'll see a plus icon. If I left-click, I can choose Create Part Studio. That will create a new blank part in my document. In fact, you can see a new tab has been added to the document called Part Studio 1. So now I'm off and running. I have a new blank part, and I'm ready to start creating my geometry. Now, one big tip that I have is, in general, keyboard shortcuts will save you a lot of time. So you'll see me from time to time use different keyboard shortcuts, and I'll fill you in on some of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, but they can really make a big difference if you're trying to speed up, your design process. But let's get started simple. I want to start a sketch on the front plane. So how would I go about doing that? It's easy to pre-select. So for instance, I know I want to start on the front plane, so I'll left-click it in the graphics, and then select the sketch icon in the toolbar. Now I'm in a sketch on the front plane, right? Notice the toolbar has changed. So now that I'm in a sketch, I see sketch icons, right? Lines, circles, rectangles, the things that I expect to see in a sketch environment. So again, just another example, the toolbar dynamically changes depending on what you're doing. Now, what I want to do here is start sketching, of course. So I've started my sketch on the front plane, but I haven't actually sketched anything, and there's one important step that I still need to do. Rotate normal to the sketch plane. You can see the front plane somewhat askew, and I want to be looking straight at it. And that's a command we call rotate normal to sketch plane, or view normal to sketch plane. Now, you can find this a few different ways. I'm a big fan of the N key. If you hit N on your keyboard, that's normal too. That's a fast way to do it. But one big tip that I have in general for Onshape as you're getting started is the right-click menu. If you right-click on something, you're going to see a list of options that pertain to that thing that you're right-clicking on. So if I right-click a sketch in my feature list, I see options to edit the sketch. I see options to rename or delete the sketch. So again, in general, one big tip that I have for any new user is try right-clicking. If you're looking for some option or to edit or delete or rename or change the appearance or add a material, all of those things can be found by right-clicking. Right? Now, another example of this is the view normal to sketch plane. I want to view normal to the front plane. I could use the N key, again, if you're a fan of keyboard shortcuts. In my case, I'm going to right-click anywhere in the empty graphic space, and you'll see the option View Normal to Sketch Plane. So again, can't stress this enough as you're getting started. That right-click menu is very important. Whether you're in a sketch, a part, assembly, a drawing, in all those scenarios, you're going to get a context-sensitive menu, a context-sensitive list of options that relate to whatever it is that you're right-clicking on. So very valuable, very important part of the Onshape interface. You mentioned projects in the beginning. Is the document the same as projects? That's a very, yes, I would say so. It's very easy to equate documents to projects. Now, we have some additional ideas for where documents could go in the future, but as you're getting started, I would definitely think of a document as a project. And you can store anything project related within that one document. You can even create folders and subfolders as your document gets bigger to store all the different tabs, and so you can really organize it. Very similar to how you would organize folders on a file structure, right? So just keep in mind, yes, you can think of that document as a project, a project level container. It holds all the project data. All right, so I'm in a sketch. I'm normal to the sketch plane. I use that right-click menu. Now I'm ready to start sketching. And, you can see all the various tools that I have available. I'm going to start with a circle. Now, just keep in mind, many of these tools have drop-down menu options next to them. So we don't have one type of circle. We have two, and an ellipse option as well. We have two different types of rectangles and three different types of arc, as well as a conic option. So just keep in mind, there are drop-down menus to allow you to choose either variations or different sketch commands. In this case, I want a center point circle, and I want to attach my circle to the origin. So I'm going to move my cursor over the origin, and notice that it highlights, and I see a little flag appear indicating I'm constraining my part to the origin. I'll left-click, and now we have our first circle in our sketch. Now I want to do this one more time. I'm going to create a circle horizontal to the right of the last one. And as I move my cursor, notice I get that visual cue that I'm creating a constraint relative to the origin, horizontal in this case, to the origin. So you're getting those visual snaps letting you know. And the big thing here is you don't have to manually constrain these later. If you've come from other CAD software, sometimes that can be a tedious process, right? Manually constraining. Now in my case, left-click, and now I have a second circle, right? So now I have two circles in my sketch, and I want to define the size of these two circles. Right now I have no idea what the size of them are. So I'll select the dimension command from the toolbar, left-click the first circle, left-click to place the dimension, and then enter a value, in this case 25. So 25, enter. Now, as soon as I do that, notice two things. First off, the entire sketch scales to match that first dimension, so everything shrinks. And the reason is just so things don't overlap and you don't have a big issue by adding the first dimension. So in my case, I got to scroll in just a bit. Also notice that the circle on the left is black, the circle on the right is blue. In Onshape, you get visual cues as to the level of definition in your sketch. This is black, indicating fully defined. This is blue, indicating underdefined. One of the easiest ways to tell is just to left-click drag the geometry, and you can see diameter is not defined, distance from the origin is not defined. So left-click drag is an easy way to tell what you have left to define. The big thing I want to stress is as you add dimensions, as you add constraints, you're going to see your sketch turn from blue to black. And in general, it's a goal to have a fully defined sketch. It's at least a best practice. All right, so I've defined my first circle, and it is black, meaning fully defined. I'm going to add another dimension to the circle on the right. So left-click. This one will be a diameter of 20 millimeters. Now, Just adding the diameter dimension doesn't fully define this one. It did in this case because that circle was on the origin. But we still haven't defined this circle's distance from the origin. So if I left click and drag it, you can see it's free to move left to right. So I need to now define that distance. Again, go back to dimension. I'll left click this center point of each circle, move my dimension down, left click, and enter 85. Now you can see both circles are fully defined. Right? Now what I want to do is sketch a construction line between the two circles. So I'll select line, then click construction in the toolbar, and now I can sketch point to point. And again, just left click, and now I have my line. The reason we want this line is we want to mirror geometry around it, right? We want that centered relationship as we're sketching. So I'm going to sketch another line. Again, select line. Notice as I move my cursor over the circle, it highlights, indicating you're attaching your line to this circle. Left click. Again, notice I get that visual snap. Left click, and now I've attached both endpoints of my line to the circle, and here's the line that I want to mirror to the other side. Right? So I'll select mirror in the toolbar, left click the line that I want to mirror, and it mirrors it to the other side. Right? Now, what I want to do next is, of course, add a dimension. Now, you may ask yourself, well, why couldn't you have just sketched the two lines? And the answer is you could have. The neat thing about the mirror is you get that symmetry about the construction line. Right? So it's easy for me to add a dimension and ensure it's still centered over that construction line. I'll select dimension, left click to place, and enter my value. In this case, 16. Question, instead of drop downs, all the tools are separated out on the iPad. Yes. So on the Onshape mobile app, it's a bit different. You have a toolbar drop or flyout that you tap, and then all of the tools will be within that flyout. So the Onshape mobile app is a bit different in that the toolbar is a button that you fly out with all the different commands. We actually have done a webinar on Onshape mobile. If you check out our YouTube channel, you should find a list of past webinar recordings, and one of them is Onshape mobile. We really focus specifically on using the mobile app, all the keys to Onshape mobile. All right, so we've gotten back to a fully defined sketch, but I still have one more thing that I want to do to this sketch, and I want to do something a bit different than what many users would do, and just to show how to constrain manually. So let me explain what I mean. So I want to sketch two circles. Now, I'm deliberately sketching these circles out here in empty space. You normally wouldn't do that. The reason I'm doing that is just to show you how to manually constrain geometry. Now, what do I mean by constraining? Well, everything that we've done up to this point has been automatic. As I sketched that second circle, I saw the snap that indicated I'm horizontal to the origin. As I sketched this line, I saw it snap to these two circles. All that is creating constraints. And what I want to do is manually create a constraint, walk you through that process. So let's say, for instance, that I want these two circles to have the same diameter. I want them to be equal. All we have to do is left click, and select the constraint from the toolbar. In this case, equal. Right? So that's the process of manually adding constraints. You simply left click the geometry you want, and then select the constraint from the toolbar. Now, if I change the diameter of one, they both update, right? So that's a simple example of adding a constraint. Let me give you another example. Let's say that I want this circle concentric with this circle. Again, left click, then choose the constraint from the toolbar. You can see concentric. Same thing, left click, choose concentric, and now I have two circles, the same size, inside of my two previous circles. So there will come a time, much of what you do is automatic in terms of constraints, but there will come a time when you need to manually add constraints. And again, the process is all the same. It doesn't matter what the constraint is. Select the geometry just by left clicking. There's no special keyboard shortcuts, just a left click, and then select command from the toolbar, the constraint you want from the toolbar. The other common question then is, how do I see these constraints? How do I delete these constraints? Those kinds of things. One big tip that I have, check show constraints in the sketch dialog here in the top left corner, and you'll see little flags appear for all the different constraints. If you want to delete one, just left click the flag and hit the delete key on the keyboard. So again, many of the constraints you won't have to worry about. They automatically are created as you're sketching. But there are many situations where you're going to need to create them, just because of the geometry. All right, so that's manually adding constraints. The last thing that I need to do here is add a dimension, right? Of course, to define the diameter here, and it should be 12. So now we're back to a fully defined sketch. Question, is there something like sketch analysis? If you have many lines that overlap or an open profile, it's a huge help. We don't have sketch analysis. We don't have an icon or a button that you can use for sketch analysis. What we've done instead is make, Onshape interface clear when these things happen. If you have overlapping lines, it's not going to hurt a feature. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. So you don't have to worry about overlapping lines. The other thing to point out is, if you have an open profile, it will not be shaded. So one of the things to keep in mind is, as you sketch, any closed contours are going to be shaded a slightly darker color than the outside geometry. So I'm not sure how clear it is through GoToWebinar, but you can see on the inside of this sketch, it's shaded. That's my visual cue that this is closed. If this wasn't shaded, I know something's open. So we're constantly telling you that via the Onshape interface. So keep an eye out for shaded contours. That means closed. If it's not shaded, it's not closed, and therefore can't be used in a solid feature, right? So that's one big thing. Again, the other thing to keep in mind, if I had this line and another line right on top of it, it's not going to affect my feature. I can still create a feature just fine. So no, we don't have sketch analysis, but I think in the two examples you gave, it's not, it shouldn't hurt you, right? You can see the shaded profile, and overlapping lines aren't a huge issue. So what do I mean by that? And I want to stress this again is in many other CAD systems, if you have an overlapping line, if you have multiple contours in your sketch, you have to then come back and trim or delete geometry in order to use it for a feature. It has to have one closed loop. That's not the case in Onshape. So I can take a sketch just like this without trimming anything out, right, which you would have to do in many other systems. I can go straight to the extrude command, right? It will recognize that there is overlapping many separate contours, and will automatically grab any nested contours within that shape and then extrude it. So I don't have to worry about, did I trim out the arcs to create one enclosed loop? So again, just keep that in mind. Now, you can extrude the entire sketch like I'm doing here, or you can say, okay, I don't want to choose the entire sketch. I want to choose pieces of the sketch and extrude them separately. So you can think a little bit differently. It's not necessarily one sketch, one feature in Onshape. You can build a lot of things into a single sketch and control several features with it if you'd like to work that way. But just keep in mind, you can select pieces of the sketch to extrude. You can select the entire sketch from the feature list to extrude. It's entirely up to you. Now, the options in the extrude command are pretty straightforward, especially if you have experience with other CAD applications, Inventor or Autodesk, or Inventor or SolidWorks or CATIA or Creo. It's very similar, right? We have extrude, you have certain end types like symmetric, up to next, up to face, and so on. And then you have a depth in this case because we're doing a blind extrusion, right? So I have 25 millimeters. I can manually drag the extrude depth if I choose to. Right, and this is when you start to get a feel for the performance of Onshape. I'm getting real-time dynamic dragging through a web browser. Right, so in my case, I just want a 25 millimeter depth extrusion. I'll hit the green check, and now I have my first feature. Question: will a recording of this webinar be available to rewatch? I'd like to follow along on my own. Yes, we will be sending a link out to anyone that signed up for the webinar, and we'll also be posting it. So just keep an eye out. You should get an email with the recording. Can we come back in the timeline and disassociate, delete the symmetry between the circles, and then continue to work on an actual design with the extrude? Can we come back in the timeline and disassociate, delete the symmetry between circles, and then continue to work on the actual design with the extrude? Yes, you can always go back into a feature, or a sketch. So in this example, you see I now have sketch 1, extrude 1. This is the sketch I created. This is the extrude I created. If I needed to change things, I can right-click, edit, go back into my sketch, delete my constraint, whatever it is that I need to do. One big tip that I have is if you go back and edit a feature, you can click Final, and it will show you the final regenerated model live as you make changes. So if I wanted to change the length and see the overall impact on the overall part, I click Final, change my length, and it's going to update live for me. It's a neat way of making changes kind of iteratively and seeing, did this break something? Did I cause an issue? Right? I don't have to go back, accept, rebuild, wait for it to see if it fixes it. I can just click Final and watch it update live. So one big tip that I have if you're editing any sketches or features. All right, so this is the first feature in our feature list. We have sketch 1 and extrude 1 in our feature list. The next thing I want to do is create one more feature. And we're going to do this on the top plane. So I'll left click the top plane, select the sketch command from the toolbar, and again, I'm going to use the right click view normal to sketch plane. Right? Now what I can do is start with a line. I'll select line from the toolbar. Again, I want to create a line horizontal to the origin. So I'm going to wait till I see that inference. You can see it pop up there. And so I'll left click, and just create a few simple lines. Now, what I'd like to do here is create a simple offset sketch. But before I do that, I need to add a few dimensions. So let's do that. Let's add a dimension between the line here and the edge of 9. And let's add a dimension for the angle here. Actually, let's do a dimension between the plane and a point. This is another commonly asked question. Can you dimension to planes? The answer is yes. Left click. There's my dimension, in this case, relative to the right plane. Enter 20, enter. Let's add a quick angle dimension. Let's say 170. All right. And now we have 3 defined lines. The only thing we haven't defined is the overall length. Now, what I want to do next is I want to offset all 3 of these lines at once, right? We can do this with the offset command. So I left-click offset. Then a big tip that I have is if I want to offset all 3 of these at once, I don't have to left-click individually each one. I can left-click drag one of the lines, and it's going to grab the entire chain of lines. So if you have dozens of lines in Arts and you want to offset them all at once, don't left-click them individually. Left-click drag one of them, and it will grab everything attached to it. All right, and then I drag, offset, let's say right about there. Left-click, then enter a value. In this case, I want 8 millimeter. Right. Then what we can do is close these offsets up with a few lines. And what I want to do is I want to attach the ends of this sketch to the edges of the part. And this is just to build in a bit of design intent, right? So if I decide to make the part bigger, I don't want this sketch falling apart because of how it was constructed. I want it attached in an intelligent way. The way we can do this is with a use command. Now, if you've come from other CAD applications, it's often referred to as convert entities or project. But essentially, it has the same purpose. It allows you to grab edges or faces or past sketches and convert them to the current sketch and use them in the current sketch, right? So I can select use, move my cursor over the ends of the part, and what you'll notice is it highlights, indicating an edge, right? I can grab those edges and convert them, and now it's easy for me to attach my lines to the edges in an intelligent way. The reason that's important, the reason converting these edges is important, is if I decide to make this bigger, I don't have this feature fail as a result of it, right? So this is our second sketch, and what I want to do next is create our second feature. Real quickly, a few questions. What is the typical RAM required? I would say, anything more than 2, even 4 gig would probably be what I would personally recommend. 2 gig would probably work. It's not nearly as resource intensive as a more traditional installed application because a lot of the computation is done in the cloud. If you have 4 gig or more RAM, you're probably just fine. It depends also on the size. If you're building an entire car in Onshape, for example, thousands of parts, then you would probably want to invest in a little bit more RAM heavy machine. But simple designs. Onshape runs on a phone, right? So it's not a really resource-intensive application. You should be fine with any modern computer. You don't need to buy a specific workstation. I think that's the key thing I want to stress. How many projects can we do for free? Using the Onshape, free plan, the public plan, you can create unlimited public documents. So that's the detail. If you need private intellectual property, if you want to store your intellectual property and potentially sell it one day, then you would need to use the Onshape professional plan. But there's unlimited free projects as long as you're okay with them being public and available to anyone to use. If you want private data, you'll need the Onshape Pro plan. All right, so moving on. Oh, next question, real quickly. What if I wanted the sketch plane rotated at 90 degrees? Well, you don't need to rotate the plane itself. Remember, the plane is infinite length. I can always just rotate it around like this and then do a normal 2. But if I want to just rotate it around, I can do that. I can also use the arrow keys. Right, these will give me 40 to 5 degree increments, so I can bump it around in 40 to 5 degree increments if you're just looking to rotate 90. There's a few different approaches. I might just rotate around till it's close and then do a view normal to sketch plane. Right. All right, so what I want to do next is create my second feature. We've created our second sketch. I'm ready to turn this into a feature. And what I want to do is mention one thing important, I think, for new users getting started, especially if you've come from other CAD systems. We don't have a separate button for cut. I think that's one of the commonly asked questions. Where's extrude cut? Where's sweep cut? Where's loft cut? All of these are options within their individual dialogues, right? So if I go to the extrude command, there's an option for remove, and that will give me a cut, right? There's an option to add, right? That will add this extrude to the previous part, right? There's an option for new, and this gets into a more advanced topic where we build multiple parts together in the same part studio. There's also an option for intersect, and this will give you only what's intersecting between the two features. So just keep in mind, extrude, revolve, sweep, and loft all have these options. These options allow you to define, is it a cut? Are you adding this to another part? Are you creating a new part? Or are you trying to get only what's intersecting between them? In my case, intersect gives me only what's intersecting, which is that bent dog bone link shape that I was looking for. All right, so I'll hit the green check. Now I have my second sketch and my second feature in the feature list. All right, so up to this point, if you've come from an Inventor, a SolidWorks, or a CATIA or Creo, a lot of this should look familiar. The sketch and feature workflow is not a new concept. Now, of course, we're running this all inside of the browser, which is new. But what's really unique about Onshape is the ability to work together, work collaboratively. And one of the things I always like to mention is Onshape's sharing capabilities. So just keep in mind, if you click the share icon in the top right corner, you can share with someone and they do not need to download or install anything, right? They may need to create an Onshape account, but that's all. And they don't have to download or install. You just simply enter their email address, define their permissions. Very important step. Am I sharing with a vendor and they don't need the ability to edit? I can specify can view, right? This means they cannot edit. I can specify can edit, but they shouldn't be able to export, shouldn't be able to copy the document, right? So I never have to worry about, is that an issue? Are they taking my intellectual property? If I email someone a photo, for instance, or I email someone a CAD file, I never know what happens to it. In Onshape, I can share with someone, but not allow them to export or copy. But that's really up to you. You define the permissions you're comfortable with giving that person. By default, when you create a document, only you can see it. But once you share it, you can work together with others in real time. Right? So it's up to me to define how I want to share. Right? But once I've done that, I click share. They instantly get an email. And the neat thing is they click a link, and they're looking at the same model you are. Right? So we can work together on the same model in real time. In fact, you'll see a little visual cue that someone else is in the document, right? So in the top right corner, you can see that someone else is in the document. If I look closely at the tab at the bottom here, I can see that someone else is in this tab. And if they switch tabs, I instantly see that as well, right? So I can see that person has switched tabs. So you get real-time collaboration between users. The moment that someone decides to add a feature, anyone in the document decides to add a feature, you're going to see a little notification on your side that, hey, someone else is creating new feature. You can see new feature and the person creating that feature. The other thing that I want to mention is, again, in more traditional systems, file-based systems, you have to save, copy to a server, check in, whatever the operation is, in order to see other people's work. So no one else can see anything until that operation is done. And Onshape, the moment a new feature is created, you instantly see it update. So you can see fillet 1 was just added to this part. I did not save, did not check in. There's none of that in Onshape. The moment that person changes it, you instantly see it edit, right? So if they decide to change the appearance, for instance, instant updates. And it doesn't matter whether you're on, a mobile device, you're logged into the browser, if you have a dozen people in the same document, everyone's always apprised of the latest version. Everyone's always aware of what's going on, right? All right, so questions. Question, can a picture or photo be used as a background to trace on the profile? Yes, I would definitely take a look at the sketch image command. We've done past videos on it. So if you just do a search Onshape, insert sketch image, you should find instructions, a video on how to do that. Will you demonstrate the whole function? Stick around. If I have time at the end, I will. If not, do a search for Onshape whole feature, and we've done past videos on that as well. But if you stick around to the end, I will do a short demo on the whole feature. Can you make public documents read-only? Are they totally open to be copied or edited? They are totally open to be copied. They cannot edit. Remember, making it public just means that others can view and copy. They cannot edit your document, even if it's public. They can only copy it and then modify their own copy of it. But public documents, by definition, are open to anyone to view and copy. Is there a way to limit collaborative changes other than view only? Well, you have view. Well, let's go through them real quickly. You can restrict the ability to copy. You can restrict their ability to insert it into other documents as a link, or export, share, and comment. Of course, delete as well. So these are the individual permissions that you can specify. Of course, if you go to can view, you can uncheck comment, and then they can't do anything, right? They're just viewing, nothing but that. Can you export to STL for 3D printing? Yes, just right-click the tab and choose export. Right, you'll see an option for STL. How to get a rendered model? Check out the Onshape App Store. I mentioned this earlier, but in the Onshape App Store, there's several apps for rendering, some of which run right inside of Onshape. How many axes does the CAM module support? Again, we have several CAM apps available in the App Store, all the way up to 5 axes. So check out the Onshape App Store. You have a lot of different options. Can you join parts? Yes. Check out the Boolean command. Boolean if you're trying to merge parts together. All right. So, if you mean by join parts, assemble parts and test motion, we're going to talk about assemblies in a moment, so forgive me if I misunderstood. All right, so I mentioned before real-time collaboration. The moment that someone else makes a design change, you instantly see it update. If anyone decides to add a comment, if they decide to provide feedback to the model, assuming they have that permission, again, you're going to see it instantly update. So the moment a new comment is created, you can see a little notification. If I left-click, you can see a comment was added. You can also see this comment tags a face. You can see face of extrude 1 here. If I left-click, it's going to highlight the face that person tagged with a comment. So just keep in mind, comments are an effective way of collaborating or communicating with others in the document. Question, how to hide the planes? The P key on the keyboard. If you use the P key on the keyboard, it hides and shows the planes. Is 3D printing integrated under CAM like Slicer and G-Code? Yes. Slicers you will find under CAM. All right, so the last thing that I want to mention about collaboration, the commonly asked question is, how do I track who did what? Right? Because now that I have multiple people in the same document, I need to know who made what change and when, and potentially be able to restore before that change. Just keep in mind, again, everything that's done in Onshape is tracked in the history. And this isn't just changes that you've made, this is changes that anyone has made. So you're going to see who made the change and what time they made the change. And you'll be able to go back to a moment before it and say restore. So don't worry about having any kind of issues with, did this person mess up the design? I can always restore back to before a point where that happened. So not only can you collaborate with others in real time, but you get a complete audit trail of every little change that's happened in the document by anyone in the document, right? So definitely a very valuable tool. And it was what I'm referring to when we talk about that built-in data management capability. All right, so we are almost out of time, and I still have assemblies to cover and drawings, and I'm going to go through them quickly. So what I want to do here is walk you through assemblies and how Onshape is a bit different, especially if you've come from an Inventor or SolidWorks or so on. So let's start by inserting a part, and we want to insert that dog bone link that we modeled a moment ago. All right, so we'll choose the dog bone link, and I'll just left click out here in space to place it. So now we've inserted our dog bone link, but it's free to move in any direction. Right? If I left click, I can rotate it, I can move it any way I want. My goal with this is, of course, to attach this link to the frame, but I need to constrain it. It needs to be free to pivot, right? So just keep in mind, if you want to constrain things, we don't use a combination of faces, and I think that's the common tactic that a lot of new users will use. Think of Onshape mates as defining two mate connection points and bringing them together. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to define a revolute mate, and I want to mouse over where this part attaches to the frame. I want to find that point. In this case, it's this point. And I want to say that point I want to attach to this point on the frame. So all we're doing is we're bringing these 2 points together. The type of mate that we choose defines how much motion there is. So a revolute mate allows it to rotate, which is what we need. But there are other mates in here. I could choose a slider mate or a cylindrical mate. One big tip that I have is you can choose the mate, hit play, and see what freedom of motion it has. And that's a very valuable thing to make sure, okay, it is what I need. I need just rotation. Or I can try out the different mates. I can choose slider and say play. And I can clearly that's not the motion that I need, the degree of freedom that I need in this example. So I encourage you to try out the different mates, hit the play icon, see what they do. It's a great way to learn the various degrees of freedom of all the different mates. But in this example, I can just hit the green check, and we have one final mate to create. Right? Again, just establish the connection point on this part, the connection point, or the mate connection point on this part, and hit the green check. Right? So now I've defined a mate that holds the dog bone link to the frame and the swing arm, and I can grab and drag to manipulate. Right? All right, so that is a quick intro into our assemblies. I have just 2 minutes left, and I am going to use them to cover drawings, so bear with me for just a second. We're going to create a new drawing in this document. So I'm going to go back to the same plus icon we started with. This time, though, I'm going to choose Create Drawing. Right, that'll create a new blank drawing. We'll choose our template. And you'll see a new drawing tab has been added to the document. Now I can insert my views, add my dimensions, and so on. So just keep in mind, I'm not going to go through for time's sake fully detailing this out, but I think you get the idea. Section views, detailed views, break views, all the various dimension styles that you can need. And it's all just a matter of going through and laying out all your various dimensions. All right, so for time's sake, I am going to cut things off here. I do want to say I am going to stick around and answer all of your questions. So I see there are quite a few questions I haven't gotten to. Bear with me. I will make sure to get to them. That is what I had planned. I want to make sure to end promptly. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. Stick around if you have any questions I haven't answered. But that's it. Thank you and have a good day.